Welcome to another nighttime journey with Lieutenant Columbo. As the year winds down and darkness comes earlier, we gather for stories. November brings its own particular quiet, the year reflecting on itself. The days growing shorter, the nights longer and more contemplative. It's a time for mysteries, for questions, for the gentle unraveling of truth. Find your most comfortable position. Feel the weight of your body sinking into the mattress. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Notice how your breathing naturally slows, deepens, becomes steady and rhythmic without any effort at all. Tonight we travel to Pasadena, to one of those grand old estates that remembers different times, different lives. Lieutenant Columbo has been called to investigate a death that occurred in those quiet hours before dawn, that mysterious time when the world is suspended between darkness and light, when secrets seem closer to the surface. Whether you're here for the mystery or the sleep, you're welcome. Subscriptions and likes help us continue creating these nightly journeys. Share this with someone who loves both puzzles and rest. Now, close your eyes if you wish. Let the world fall away. Let us begin. The rain had come to Los Angeles in the night, unexpected and thorough. Not the usual brief shower that darkened pavement and then fled, but real rain. The kind that settled in and meant to stay. It drummed steadily on the Spanish tile roofs of Pasadena, ran in rivulets down the Mission Revival facades, pooled in the brick courtyards of houses that had stood since the 1920s, in the darkness before dawn. That particular darkness that is already thinking about becoming light. The city was at its quietest. 4:30 in the morning, the hour when even Los Angeles, that city that claims never to sleep, actually does rest. The hour when day shift hasn't started and night shift is winding down. The hour when secrets feel safest. On Arroyo Boulevard, behind a wall of climbing jasmine and iron gates painted dark green, the Thorne estate occupied its corner lot with the confidence of old money and older architecture. The house itself was a Craftsman masterpiece, low-slung, broad-eaved, with ribstone pillars and deep porches that wrapped around three sides. The kind of house that appeared in architectural history books, that tourists photographed from the street, that whispered of a Los Angeles that existed before freeways and fame. Inside, the rooms were dark. The furniture sat in familiar positions. The Morris chair by the fireplace, the mission oak table in the dining room, the piano in the corner that no one had played in years. On the mantelpiece, a collection of antique clocks marked time in their various ways. A Swiss carriage clock, a French ormolu timepiece, an English bracket clock with brass finials. All silent now, all stopped. In the study, that masculine room of leather and books, and mahogany, more stillness. The desk lamp was on, creating a small pool of warm light in the pre-dawn darkness. Papers spread across the desk surface. A fountain pen, uncapped, a coffee cup half full, growing cold. And in the chair behind the desk, slumped forward slightly, as if he had simply fallen asleep while working, Maxwell Thorne. But Maxwell Thorne would never wake. The rain continued its steady percussion. The darkness began, almost imperceptibly, to thin. The clocks stayed stopped. And somewhere in the house, something that had been hidden in darkness would soon be revealed by light. Dawn was coming. And with it, the truth. The housekeeper found him at 6:15. Rosa Martinez had worked for Mr. Thorne for 12 years. She knew his habits, his preferences, his routines. She knew that he often worked late into the night. The theater kept odd hours, but that he always went up to bed eventually. She had never, in 12 years, found him asleep at his desk. She knocked first. "Mr. Thorne? Sir?" No answer. But the light was on beneath the door. She opened it slowly, respectfully. Saw him there, slumped forward. For just a moment, she thought perhaps he really had fallen asleep. It happened, didn't it? People fell asleep at their desks. But something was wrong. Something about the stillness, something about the way his hand lay on the desk, palm up, fingers slightly curled. Something about the absolute absence of breath. "Mr. Thorne?" Her voice was different now. Higher, uncertain. She came closer. Saw his face, turned to the side, saw the strange color of his skin, saw that he was not sleeping, would never sleep, was beyond sleeping. She backed away slowly, her hand over her mouth, then faster. Out of the room, down the hall to the kitchen phone. Her hand shook as she dialed. 911. "Please," she said when the operator answered. "Please send someone. It's Mr. Thorne. I think he's dead." The rain continued. Outside, the sky was growing lighter, grey dawn spreading across the city. The jasmine-covered wall did not keep out the sirens when they came, piercing the quiet morning, announcing to the neighborhood that something had happened, something terrible, in the old Thorne house on Arroyo Boulevard. The clocks in the study remained stopped, each one frozen at a different time, as if time itself had become confused in that room, as if multiple moments existed simultaneously, layered one atop another like scenes in a play, like memories that refused to stay in the past where they belong. The phone rang at 5:53 a.m. Lieutenant Columbo was not, technically, asleep. He had been lying in bed for the past 20 minutes, listening to the rain and thinking about whether he needed to get the car looked at again. That noise it had started making, that sort of grinding sound when he turned left, was that something important, or was that just the car being old? The car was very old. "I got it," he mumbled, reaching for the phone before it could wake his wife. "Columbo." His voice was gravelly with near sleep. "Lieutenant, sorry to wake you. It was Sergeant Wilson from dispatch. Got a call from Pasadena. Looks like a suspicious death. Captain thought you'd want it." "Pasadena?" Columbo sat up, blinking in the darkness. "What kind of suspicious?" "Preliminary report says natural causes, but the responding officers say something feels off. Victim is Maxwell Thorne. You know that name?" "Thorne." Columbo rubbed his face. "Theater guy, right? Experimental stuff." "That's him. Found dead at his desk this morning. Housekeeper called it in." "Found dead at his desk this morning. Housekeeper called it in. What makes it suspicious if it looks natural?" "Officer Santiago says the scene feels staged, says you'd want to see it yourself." Columbo was already standing, already reaching for yesterday's pants draped over the chair. "Give me the address." He wrote it on the pad he kept by the bed, phone cradled against his shoulder. His wife stirred, made a questioning sound. "Gotta go, honey," he whispered. "Go back to sleep." "Be careful," she murmured, already drifting back. "It's raining." "I will." 40 minutes later, having stopped for coffee in a paper cup that was already leaking, Columbo pulled his battered Peugeot up to the gates of the Thorne estate. The rain had softened to a drizzle. The sky was lighter now, that peculiar gray that passes for daylight in Los Angeles during a rainstorm. A patrol car sat in the circular driveway, lights off. An ambulance waited behind it. The front door of the house stood open, warm light spilling out onto the wet porch. Columbo got out slowly, careful not to spill more coffee on himself than he already had. He wore his raincoat, the tan one his wife kept saying he should replace, but hadn't bothered to button it. His shoes squelched on the wet brick pathway. Officer Santiago met him at the door. Young guy, maybe 30, sharp eyes. "Lieutenant, thanks for coming out." Sure. What we got?" "Male victim, 46 years old, found at his desk approximately 90 minutes ago. No obvious signs of trauma. Coroner's investigator is with him now. But you don't think it's natural causes?" Columbo sipped his leaking coffee. Santiago hesitated. I think you should see it, sir. There's something about it. The way he's positioned. The stuff on his desk. I can't put my finger on it, but it feels wrong." Columbo nodded slowly. "Let's take a look." They walked through the house, through rooms filled with beautiful old furniture, with art on the walls, with the accumulated objects of a life lived with taste and means. The house smelled of old wood and leather and, faintly, of jasmine from the vines outside. The study was at the back. Overlooking what Columbo could glimpse was a garden, though in the rain and dawn light it was mostly just shapes and shadows. And there at the desk was Maxwell Thorne. Columbo stood in the doorway of the study for a long moment, just looking. not moving, not touching anything, just looking. The coroner's investigator, a woman named Chen, whom Columbo had worked with before, glanced up. "Lieutenant, glad they called you." "Yeah? Why's that?" "Because I can't find a cause of death and the scene doesn't make sense." Columbo stepped into the room carefully, aware of where he placed his feet. "Doesn't make sense how? Everything's too perfect. Look at him. He slumped forward, like he fell asleep while writing. But his hand is positioned exactly right, pen still near it. The papers are too neat. The coffee cup is placed just so. It's like somebody arranged him," Columbo finished. "Yeah." Columbo moved closer to the desk. Maxwell Thorne had been, in life, a handsome man, tall, judging by the length of him in the chair. Silver hair, worn longer than most men his age. Wearing what looked like expensive casual clothes. Dark slacks, a black turtleneck. No shoes, just socks. "No shoes," Columbo said. He was comfortable. Working at home late took his shoes off. "Or early," Chen said. "Lividity suggests he died between 3 and 5 a.m. Before dawn." "Yes." Columbo looked at the desk. Papers covered its surface, handwritten notes, typed pages, what looked like scripts or stage directions. The fountain pen was a nice one, expensive. The coffee cup was half full, as Santiago had noted in his report. "What's in the coffee?" "Just coffee. We'll run a full talk screen, but there's nothing obvious." Columbo's attention moved to the mantelpiece, to the collection of antique clocks. Those all stopped. "Yes. Different times, though. Looks like they were already stopped before." "This. The victim was a collector. Repaired them himself, apparently. So he liked time. Liked how it worked." Columbo filed that away. Officer Santiago appeared in the doorway. "Lieutenant, the housekeeper is calmer now. She's in the kitchen if you want to talk to her." "Yeah, okay. Thanks." Rosa Martinez sat at the kitchen table. A cup of tea in front of her that she wasn't drinking. She was in her 50s, Columbo guessed, with careful hands and red-rimmed eyes. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm Lieutenant Columbo. I'm sorry for your loss." "He was a good man," she said immediately. "A good employer. Fair. Kind. This shouldn't have happened." Columbo sat down across from her, pulling out the small notebook he always carried. "Can you tell me about this morning, when you found him?" She walked him through it, arriving at 6, as she always did. Making her way to the study because the light was on. Finding him there. Was that unusual? Him working all night? No. He often worked late. The theater, you know, it keeps strange hours. But he always went to bed eventually. He's never. I understand. Columbo made a note. "Did you notice anything else? Anything out of place? Anything different?" She thought about it. "The front door. What about it?" "It wasn't locked. The deadbolt wasn't thrown. Mr. Thorne always locked the deadbolt before going to bed, even if he stayed up late in the study. If he was done going in and out, he locked it. But this morning it wasn't locked." "No." "Does anyone else have keys to the house?" "Just me. And his ex-wife, I think, though she lives in New York now. And maybe some of his theater people. I don't know for sure." Columbo made another note. "These theater people, was anyone here last night? Did Mr. Thorne have visitors?" "I left at 5 yesterday afternoon." "He was alone then?" "But he could have had someone come by later." "He often did. Working on shows, rehearsing, discussing ideas. Do you know who he was working with recently?" "Miss Voss is usually here. Diana Voss. She's a director too, one of his former students. They were collaborating on something, I think." "Diana Voss." Columbo wrote the name carefully. "Anyone else?" "Actors. Sometimes. Other theater people. Mr. Thorne knew everyone in the community. He'd been directing for 25 years. Did he seem worried about anything lately? Stressed? Scared?" Rosa hesitated. "He was. Preoccupied. The last few weeks. Distracted. He'd be here at the table, having coffee, and I'd speak to him and he wouldn't hear me. Like his mind was somewhere else. Any idea what he was preoccupied about? No. Mr. Thorne was very private. He didn't talk about his personal business. Columbo nodded, closing his notebook. You've been very helpful. Thank you. He stood, then paused. One more thing. The clocks in the study, they're all stopped. Do you know why? Mr. Thorne liked to repair them. He'd buy broken ones, fix them. Those ones were projects, I think. He hadn't gotten them running yet, so they'd been stopped for a while. Yes. Weeks, some of them. Columbo nodded slowly. Okay, thank you, Mrs. Martinez. By 8 a.m., the rain had stopped and the house was filling with people, crime scene techs, more officers, a representative from the coroner's office. The organized chaos of a suspicious death investigation. Columbo stood on the back porch, looking out at the garden. It was a beautiful space, even in the grey morning light, carefully maintained beds, a fountain, old trees dripping with rain. At the far end, he could see what looked like a small studio or workshop building. Officer Santiago joined him. I called around like you asked. Got some information on the victim. Yeah? What'd you find out? Santiago consulted his notes. Maxwell Thorne, 46 years old. Renowned experimental theater director. Started in New York in his 20s. Moved to LA 15 years ago. Founded the Prism Theater Collective. It's in a warehouse downtown, apparently pretty influential. Known for avant-garde productions, adaptations of classic works with modern twists. Won a bunch of awards. Family? Divorced 4 years ago. Ex-wife is Caroline Thorne, née Westbrook. She moved back to New York after the split. No kids. Parents both deceased. One younger brother, David Thorne, lives in Seattle, owns a restaurant. Money. House is paid off, worth about $3 million. Theater Collective is non-profit, but he was on the board of several foundations. Taught part-time at CalArts. Comfortable. Not super rich, but doing fine. Any enemies? Debts? Problems? Nothing obvious. Everyone I talked to said he was respected, admired. Intense, demanding as a director, but fair. Nod scandals. No legal troubles. Columbo sipped his cold coffee, made a face. So why's he dead? That's the question, sir. What about this Diana Voss that the housekeeper mentioned? Haven't reached her yet. Left messages at her home and at the theater. She's probably sleeping. Theater people keep late hours. Yeah. Columbo stared out at the garden. You know what's interesting? What's that, sir? The housekeeper said Thorne was preoccupied the last few weeks. Distracted. Like something was on his mind. But she also said he was a private man. Didn't share his personal business. So we don't know what was bothering him. Right. But something was. Columbo turned to look back through the French doors into the study, and now he's dead. In the middle of the night. In a house with an unlocked door. And it's made to look like he died peacefully at his desk. Made to look. That's what your gut told you, isn't it? When you first saw him. That it was staged? Santiago nodded slowly. Yes, sir. Trust that. Trust your gut. Columbo patted the younger man's shoulder. Let's go look at that workshop out back. The building at the end of the garden was larger than it looked from the porch. Inside, it was part workshop, part library, part archive. Shelves lined with scripts, filing cabinets, a workbench covered with small tools, the delicate instruments of clock repair. And more clocks, in various states of disrepair, each one tagged with a card noting what needed fixing. He really loved these things, Santiago said, picking up a brass carriage clock. Yeah. Time. How it works. How to fix it when it breaks. Columbo walked slowly along the shelves, reading the spines of books. Theater history, directing techniques, biographies of actors and directors. And there, on the bottom shelf, something else. A cardboard box, unlabeled. Columbo bent down his knees, protesting, and pulled it out. Inside, newspaper clippings. All from 20 years ago. All about the same story. A murder trial. Diana Voss arrived at the Thorne estate at 11 a.m., driving too fast and parking badly. Columbo watched her from the study window as she got out of her car, a newer model BMW, black, still shiny with rain. She was in her mid-30s, he guessed. Tall and slim, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wore jeans and a sweater, sneakers, no makeup. She looked like she dressed in a hurry. Officer Santiago met her at the door. Columbo could hear their voices in the hallway, her voice high, shocked, disbelieving. Dead? What do you mean, dead? I just saw him 2 days ago. He was fine. What happened? She appeared in the study doorway and stopped. Saw the desk, the chair where Thorne had been. His body was gone now, at the morgue. Her hand went to her mouth. Oh God, Max. Miss Voss. Columbo approached her gently. I'm Lieutenant Columbo. I'm very sorry for your loss. She tore her eyes away from the desk. What happened? Nobody's telling me anything. Santiago just said there was a death, that I needed to come identify myself. That was it, his heart. He had high blood pressure. He was supposed to take medication, but he never remembered. Why don't we sit down? Columbo gestured to the living room. Can I get you some water? Coffee? No, I just... She took a shaky breath. I need to know what happened. They sat in the living room. Diana perched on the edge of a leather sofa, hands clasped tightly. Columbo took a chair across from her, his notebook on his knee. When did you last see Mr. Thorne? He asked. 2 days ago. Thursday afternoon. We were working on a new production. We'd been meeting here, going over the script, blocking out scenes. How long have you known him? 10 years. I was his student at CalArts. He mentored me. When I graduated, he helped me get my first directing job. We've been collaborating for the last 5 years. He was my closest friend. Her voice broke on the last word. Columbo waited, giving her time. Miss Voss, I need to ask you some questions about Thursday. About the last time you saw him. Can you walk me through that day? She nodded, wiping her eyes. I got here around 2. We worked until maybe 6. 6:30. We were in the study. Going over the script for a new adaptation of Medea, Max wanted to set it in modern Los Angeles, make it about revenge and grief and... She stopped. Sorry, you don't need all that. No, it's okay. Take your time. What happened at 6:30? I left. I had dinner plans. Max said he was going to keep working. He seemed fine. Normal. Maybe a little tired, but that was normal for him. He pushed himself too hard. Did he mention any plans? Anyone else coming by? Anything he was worried about? Diana hesitated. Just for a second. No. Nothing specific. Columbo caught the hesitation. Filed it away. Had he seemed worried lately? Stressed? Distracted? Max was always intense, always focused on the work. But... She paused. Actually, yeah. The last couple weeks, he'd been different. Quieter. I'd catch him just staring off into space. And when I'd ask what he was thinking about, he'd say nothing, just work stuff. But she didn't believe him. No. I knew Max really well. This was something else. Something personal. Did you ask him about it? Once. He told me it was nothing I needed to worry about. That it was old business that needed settling. She looked up at Columbo. What does that mean? Old business? I was hoping you could tell me. I can't. Max was private about his past. I knew the basics. His career, his divorce, stuff like that. But his life before LA? He never talked about it. Columbo made a note. Miss Voss, do you have a key to this house? Yes. Max gave me one when we started collaborating. Sometimes I'd come over early to work while he was still sleeping, or I'd let myself in if he was expecting me and didn't hear the doorbell. Why? The door wasn't locked this morning. The deadbolt wasn't thrown. Do you know if Mr. Thorne usually locked up at night? Always. He was obsessive about it. Said it was a New York habit. Did anyone else have a key that you know of? Rosa, the housekeeper. Maybe his ex-wife? I'm not sure who else. Miss Voss, where were you last night? Say between midnight and 6 a.m. Her eyes widened. You think someone killed him? This wasn't natural causes. We're investigating all possibilities. Where were you? At home. Alone. I live in Silver Lake. I was working on notes for our production. Then I went to bed around 11:30. I was asleep when Officer Santiago called. Can anyone verify that? No. I live alone. No roommate, no. She trailed off, understanding dawning. You think I had something to do with this? I'm just trying to understand what happened to your friend, Columbo said gently. That's all. But as he watched her, he noticed something. Diana Voss was grieving, yes. Shocked, yes. But there was something else in her eyes. Something that looked like fear. After Diana Voss left promising to be available for more questions, leaving her contact information, Columbo stood in the study again, thinking. The box of newspaper clippings sat on the desk where he'd left it. He opened it again, spread the clippings out. 20 years ago. New York City. A murder trial. The victim, Richard Westbrook, 58, prominent art dealer. Found dead in his gallery. Beaten, robbed. The accused, James Corrigan, 24, former gallery employee. The verdict, guilty. The sentence, 20 years. And there, in one of the clippings, a paragraph that made Columbo pause. Among those testifying for the prosecution was Maxwell Thorne, then a young theater director working in Greenwich Village. Thorne testified that he had seen Corrigan in the vicinity of the gallery on the night of the murder, had witnessed an argument between Corrigan and Westbrook the week before. So Maxwell Thorne had been a witness. His testimony had helped convict James Corrigan. 20 years ago, Columbo did the math. If Corrigan got 20 years and this was 20 years later. Santiago, he called. The officer appeared immediately. Sir? Santiago, he called. The officer appeared immediately. Sir, I need you to find out if a James Corrigan was released from prison recently. New York State. Would have been serving a sentence for murder. You think he came after Thorne? I think it's worth checking. Santiago left to make calls. Columbo continued reading the clippings. And there was another name that caught his attention. Caroline Westbrook. Richard Westbrook's daughter, who had later married Maxwell Thorne. So Thorne had married the daughter of the man whose murder he'd helped solve. That was interesting. That was a connection. Lieutenant, Santiago was back, and his face was serious. James Corrigan was released 3 weeks ago, October 15th, served his full sentence. He's living in a halfway house in Queens, but what? He violated his parole requirements. Hasn't checked in with his parole officer in 2 weeks. They've been looking for him. 2 weeks. Yes, sir. Columbo looked at the clippings again. So we've got a guy who spent 20 years in prison, partly because of Maxwell Thorne's testimony. He gets out, disappears, and 2 weeks later, Thorne is dead. You want me to put out an APB? Yeah. But carefully. We don't know that he's involved. We just want to talk to him. Understood. After Santiago left again, Columbo sat down at Thorne's desk, looked at the papers spread across it, the script for Medea, notes in Thorne's handwriting, and something else, a letter, half-finished, handwritten on good stationery. Caroline, it began. And then, I know it's been years since we've spoken. I know you have every right to refuse to hear this. But I need to tell you something about your father's death. Something I should have told you a long time ago. Something that's been weighing on me more and more as time passes. The testimony I gave at Corrigan's trial was true, but it wasn't complete. There was more to the story. More that I didn't say because I was scared, because I didn't understand the implications, And there it stopped. Unfinished. Unsent. Columbo read it 3 times. What hadn't Thorne said? What was the rest of the story? And had James Corrigan found out that there was more? Had he come here, to this house, in the hours before dawn, looking for answers or revenge? The Prism Theatre Collective occupied a converted warehouse in the Arts District downtown. Columbo found it easily enough, despite never having been there before. The building had a mural on one side, bright and abstract, visible from blocks away. Inside, the space was cavernous, black walls, exposed ductwork, a stage at one end with professional lighting rigged overhead, folding chairs stacked against one wall, the smell of sawdust and paint and coffee. A young man was sweeping the stage. He looked up when Columbo entered. "We're closed today," he called, out of respect for Max. "I understand." Columbo crossed the space, his footsteps echoing. "I'm Lieutenant Columbo. I'm investigating Mr. Thorne's death. You worked with him?" "I'm Danny Chen, technical director here." "Yeah, I worked with Max for 3 years." The young man set down his broom. "Is it true that it might not have been natural causes?" "We're looking into all possibilities." "Did you see Mr. Thorne recently?" "Thursday night. We had a production meeting. About 10 people here going over the Medea project." "What time was that?" 7 to 9:30. Max seemed fine. Normal, maybe a little distracted, but he was always thinking about 3 things at once, you know. "Did he mention any plans after the meeting? Anyone he was going to see?" "No, he left when the rest of us did. Said he was going home to work on revisions." Columbo made notes. "Did you notice anything unusual about him lately? Anything worrying him?" Danny hesitated. "There was something. About 2 weeks ago, he got a phone call during rehearsal. I don't know who it was, but after he hung up, he was shaken. Really shaken. Took a break, went outside, and when he came back, he was different. Quieter. Different how? Like someone had reminded him of something he'd been trying to forget." Columbo thanked Danny and went to find the others who'd been at the Thursday meeting. One by one, he interviewed them. An actress named Sarah Kim, a costume designer named Marcus Webb, a playwright named Janet Ochoa. Each one told basically the same story. Thorne had seemed normal on Thursday night, focused on the work. No indication anything was wrong, but several of them mentioned the phone call Danny had told him about. The one that had shaken Thorne. The one that had changed something. By mid-afternoon, Columbo was at a coffee shop in Pasadena, meeting with Caroline Westbrook Thorne. She'd flown in that morning from New York, as soon as she'd heard the news. She was in her early 40s, elegant in that way, that money and taste create. Dark suit, pearls, her hair perfectly styled, despite having just gotten off a plane. But her eyes were red, and her hands shook slightly as she lifted her coffee cup. "We've been divorced for 4 years, she said, "but I still loved him. Does that make sense?" "Sure it does," Columbo said gently. "We couldn't be married anymore. We'd grown in different directions, wanted different things, but he was a good man. He didn't deserve this. Mrs. Thorne, I have to ask you some questions. About your father." She went very still. "My father. Richard Westbrook. He was murdered 20 years ago. Your husband, Mr. Thorne, was a witness in that trial." "Yes. Is that how you met? Through the trial?" "No. We met a year later, at a gallery opening. I was there for my father's foundation. We'd started it in his memory. Max was there with some theater friends. We started talking. He told me later, much later, that he'd recognized my name but didn't say anything at first. Didn't want to bring up the pain." "When did he tell you that he'd been a witness?" "On our 3rd date. He said he needed to be honest with me, that he'd testified against the man who killed my father. I was grateful. We all were, everyone who loved my father. Max's testimony helped put Corrigan away." "Did your ex-husband ever mention anything about that testimony? Anything that bothered him about it?" Caroline looked down at her coffee. "Why are you asking me this?" "Because James Corrigan was released from prison 3 weeks ago, and Maxwell Thorne was starting to write you a letter about your father's death. About his testimony." about something he didn't say at the trial. She went pale. What letter? Columbo showed her a photocopy, watched her read it, watched the color drain further from her face. I don't understand, she whispered. What didn't he say? That's what I'm trying to find out, ma'am. Do you know if Mr. Thorne had been in contact with James Corrigan recently? No. I don't know. We didn't talk often, just occasionally. Friendly. But not about deep things. Not about the past. Did you know that Corrigan was released? No. Did you know that he disappeared? That his parole officer hasn't seen him in 2 weeks? No. She looked up at Columbo, fear in her eyes. You think Corrigan killed Max? As revenge for the testimony. I think I need to find James Corrigan and ask him some questions. After Caroline Thorne left to go to the house, to make arrangements, to cry in private, Columbo sat in his car and thought. 2 weeks ago, Thorne got a disturbing phone call. 3 weeks ago, Corrigan was released. 2 weeks ago, Corrigan disappeared. That was a timeline. That was a connection. But something about it bothered him. Something didn't fit quite right. He started the car, it made that grinding noise again, and headed back to the Thorne estate. Dr. Meath Chen called him at 4:30 with preliminary autopsy results. No obvious cause of death, she said. No trauma, no signs of violence. Heart appears normal, lungs normal. No obvious stroke or aneurysm, waiting on full tox screen. But there's nothing immediately visible. So what killed him? That's the question, Lieutenant. If I had to guess right now, either something extremely subtle, poison-wise, or maybe positional asphyxiation, but there's no sign of restraint, no bruising, nothing to indicate someone held him down. Could someone have drugged him? Something that wouldn't show up right away? Possibly. There are substances that are hard to detect, that metabolize quickly. The tox screen would take a few days. But here's the thing. Even if he was drugged, that doesn't explain the positioning. The way he slumped at his desk, pen nearby, papers arranged just so. It feels staged. Yeah, that's what we all keep saying. There's something else. Time of death. Based on lividity, body temperature, rigor mortisime, putting it between 3 and 4:30 a.m. Probably closer to 4. Before dawn. Yes. Columbo thought about that. 4 a.m. The darkest hour. 4 a.m. The darkest hour. The hour when everything is still and secret. Doc, could someone have killed him somewhere else and moved him? Posed him at the desk? I thought of that, but no. The lividity pattern is consistent with the position we found him in. He died in that chair. So somebody killed him while he was sitting there, or convinced him to sit there while they did something to him. Looks that way. After hanging up, Columbo walked through the house again. The crime scene techs had finished their work. The study was empty now, quiet. He stood in the doorway, imagining. 4 a.m. Thorne is at his desk. Working or sitting there because someone told him to? The door is unlocked. Did he leave it unlocked, expecting someone? Or did someone unlock it because they had a key? He walks to the desk, looks at the papers again. The script for Medea, the notes, the unfinished letter to Caroline. And there's something he'd missed before. A small appointment book, the old-fashioned kind, leather-bound. Columbo opened it. Most entries were work-related. Rehearsals, meetings, teaching commitments. But there, on the Tuesday before his death, 2 weeks ago, a single notation. JC 2 p.m. The Grove. JC James Corrigan. Columbo felt that familiar tingle, that sense of pieces starting to connect. Thorne had met with someone with the initials JC 2 weeks ago, right around the time Corrigan disappeared from New York, right around the time Thorne got that disturbing phone call that had shaken him so badly. He called Santiago. I need you to check something. See if James Corrigan used a credit card or was caught on any cameras in Los Angeles 2 weeks ago, Tuesday, specifically. And check hotels, car rentals, Anything that might put him here. You think he came to confront Thorne? I think they met. I think they talked. And I think whatever they talked about, it led to this. The call came at 5:15. Santiago excited. Lieutenant, we got a hit. James Corrigan flew into LAX 3 weeks ago. Stayed at the motel in Hollywood for 4 days. Then he checked out and disappeared. 4 days. That puts him here 2 weeks ago. Yes, sir. And there's more. I pulled traffic camera footage from the Grove on that Tuesday. I've got a grainy shot of a man matching Corrigan's description entering the complex at 1:45 p.m. Can you see if he met with anyone? Working on it. The Grove has its own security cameras. I've requested footage. Good. Keep me posted. Columbo sat in his car in the driveway of the Thorne estate, thinking. James Corrigan had come to Los Angeles, had met with Maxwell Thorne, had then disappeared. And now Thorne was dead. It looked bad for Corrigan. Really bad. But something still bothered Columbo. Something about the timeline, about the way it all fit together. Too neat, too obvious. In his experience, when something looked too obvious, it usually was. He got out of the car and walked around to the back garden, to the workshop. Inside, he looked again at the box of clippings, read through the trial coverage more carefully. James Corrigan had maintained his innocence throughout, had insisted he didn't kill Richard Westbrook, had said he'd been framed, that someone else had done it and blamed him. The evidence had said otherwise. Corrigan's fingerprints in the gallery, his DNA on the victim. Motive, he'd been fired 2 weeks before the murder, had made threats. And Maxwell Thorne's testimony about seeing Corrigan near the gallery that night. But what had Thorne not said? What was the incomplete part of the story? Columbo picked up one of the stopped clocks from the workbench, turned it over in his hands, thought about time, about how it moves forward. But memories stay fixed, about how the past has a way of catching up with the present. His phone rang. Columbo. Lieutenant, it's Diana Voss. I remembered something about Max. Something he said last week that seemed weird at the time, but I just brushed it off. What was it? He said, we were working late and it was dark outside, and he looked out the window and said, you know what's strange about the hour before dawn? It's when everything seems clearest. When you can see what you've been avoiding seeing. What do you think he meant? I don't know. I asked him and he just shook his head and changed the subject. But now, thinking about it, it's like he knew something was coming, like he was aware of some truth he'd been hiding from. After she hung up, Columbo stood in the workshop as the grey afternoon faded toward evening. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained overcast, the light dim and watery. Something changed before dawn. That's what Thorne had realized, wasn't it? That in those hours between darkness and light, something fundamental had shifted. Some truth had emerged. But what truth? The gardener, Columbo learned, came on Wednesdays. His name was Luis Reyes, and he'd maintained the Thorne property for 8 years. Columbo found him at his next job, a house 3 blocks away. Luis was trimming hedges, his movements practiced and efficient. Mr. Reyes? I'm Lieutenant Columbo. I'd like to ask you a few questions about Maxwell Thorne. Luis set down his clippers. Terrible thing. He was a good man. Paid on time, never complained, always respectful. When were you last at the property? Last Wednesday. Week ago now. Did the usual mowed, edged, watered, cleaned up fallen leaves. Did you see Mr. Thorne that day? Briefly. He came out to ask about the fountain. It wasn't working right. I told him I'd look at it, but it needed a part. He said no rush. How did he seem? Luis thought about it. Distracted. Usually he talked to me, ask about my family, tell me about whatever show he was working on. But that day he just asked about the fountain and went back inside. Did you ever notice visitors at the house? Anyone who came by regularly? Miss Voss, the young director lady. She was there a lot. Rosa, of course. Sometimes actors or other theater people. And lately, Lately what? There was a man. I only saw him once 2 weeks ago. Tuesday morning when I came to do the lawn. He was leaving as I arrived. Looked rough. Not like Mr. Thorne's usual visitors. Columbo's attention sharpened. Can you describe him? Can you describe him? White guy, maybe late 40s. Thin. Kind of hard-looking, you know. Like someone who'd had a tough life. He got into a beat-up Toyota and drove away. Did you mention this to Mr. Thorne? Yeah, when I saw him later. I said, you okay? That guy who left looked upset. And Mr. Thorne said, that's old business, Luis. Just old business getting settled. Old business. That's what he said. Then he went back to work and didn't want to talk about it anymore. Columbo thanked Luis and walks back to his car. Old business. That phrase again. The same one Diana Voss had mentioned. What old business? The Corrigan case? The testimony? Something else entirely? He was starting to think that the key to Maxwell Thorne's death lay 20 years in the past. In that night in New York. In a gallery. In a murder. And in whatever Maxwell Thorne had seen but never said. Columbo called Diana Voss at 6 p.m. and asked if he could stop by her place in Silver Lake. She said yes, gave him the address. She lived in a small Craftsman bungalow on a hillside street, the kind of neighborhood where people with artistic aspirations lived before they made it big or gave up trying. Her house was neat, modest, with a tiny front garden and a porch with a chair and a small table. She opened the door before he could knock. Lieutenant, come in. Inside, the house was filled with books and scripts and theater posters. A laptop sat open on the coffee table, documents scattered around it. Working? Columbo asked. Trying to. I can't really focus, but sitting still is worse. She gestured for him to sit. Can I get you something? Coffee? Water? No, I'm fine, thank you. He settled into an armchair. She sat on the couch, tucking her legs under her. Miss Voss, I need to ask you more about the last few weeks. About Maxwell Thorne's state of mind. I told you everything I know. I know. But sometimes when we talk more, we remember things. Small details that didn't seem important at the time. She nodded slowly. Did Mr. Thorne ever mention James Corrigan to you? Who? James Corrigan. He was convicted of murdering Richard Westbrook 20 years ago. Mr. Thorne testified at his trial. Oh. Yeah, I knew about that. Not the specifics, but I knew Max had been a witness to something in New York. He mentioned it once when we were talking about his time there. Did he ever seem worried that Corrigan might come after him? The man was released from prison recently. Diana's eyes widened. Released? When? 3 weeks ago. And 2 weeks ago. And 2 weeks ago he was here in Los Angeles. We have evidence that he met with Maxwell Thorne. Max met with him, with the man he testified against? It looks that way. Did Mr. Thorne mention this meeting to you? No. No, he didn't say anything. But her face had gone pale. Miss Voss, are you sure you don't know what was bothering Mr. Thorne these last few weeks? I told you, he just said it was old business. Old business like a prison sentence. Like testimony that put someone away for 20 years. I don't know. Her voice rose. I don't know what was bothering him. He wouldn't talk to me about it. We were supposed to be close, supposed to be partners, and he shut me out. Do you know how that feels? To have someone you care about pull away and refuse to tell you why? Columbo watched her carefully. You were close to him, more than just professionally. He was my mentor, my friend. She stopped, looked away. Did you love him, Miss Voss? Not like that. It wasn't like that. It wasn't like that. He was married when we met, and even after the divorce, we both knew better. Our relationship was about work, about art, about creating something meaningful. But you wanted more. I wanted him to trust me. That's all. I wanted him to let me in. But there was always this wall, this part of himself he kept separate, especially lately. Columbo made a note. You have keys to his house. You knew his routines. You were one of the last people to see him alive. Yes. And you don't have an alibi for the night he died. No. That doesn't look good for you. I didn't kill him. Her eyes met his, fierce. I loved him. Not romantically, but I loved him. He taught me everything I know. He believed in me when no one else did. Why would I kill him? I don't know, Miss Voss. Why would anyone kill him? After he left, Columbo sat in his car and made more notes. Diana Voss was hiding something. He could feel it, the way she'd reacted to news of Corrigan's release. The way she'd gotten defensive when he asked about Thorne shutting her out. But was she hiding guilt? Or just grief mixed with anger at being excluded? Santiago called at 7:30 with the security footage from the Grove. I'm emailing it to you now, but I'll tell you what it shows. James Corrigan enters at 1:45 p.m. Goes to a coffee shop, sits at an outdoor table. At 2 p.m., Maxwell Thorne arrives. They talk for 43 minutes. Can you hear what they're saying? No audio, unfortunately, but body language is interesting. At first, both men look tense. Corrigan is animated, gesturing. Thorne is very still. Then, about 15 minutes in, something shifts. Thorne leans forward, starts talking more. Corrigan is listening intently. By the end, they're both calmer. They shake hands before leaving. They shake hands before leaving. They shake hands? Yes, sir. Like they've reached some kind of agreement. Columbo absorbed this. That doesn't sound like a man confronting his enemy. That sounds like a negotiation. That's what I thought. What time did they separate? What time did they separate? 2:43 p.m. Corrigan walks toward the parking structure. Thorne sits at the table for another 10 minutes, just sitting, thinking. Then he leaves too. And Corrigan. After that day, no more sightings. No credit card use. He disappears. After hanging up, Columbo opened his email and watched the footage. Santiago was right. This didn't look like a confrontation. It looked like two men having a difficult but necessary conversation. It looked like something being resolved. But what? He went back to the Thorne estate. Rosa had left for the day, but she'd given him a key. The house was quiet, dark. He turned on lights as he moved through it, heading for the study. The box of clippings was where he'd left it. He spread them out again, reading more carefully. The trial had lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution's case was strong. Physical evidence, motive, opportunity, and Maxwell Thorne's eyewitness testimony that he'd seen James Corrigan leaving the vicinity of the gallery around the estimated time of death. Corrigan's defense had been that he'd been framed, that someone else had killed Westbrook and planted evidence to implicate Corrigan. But who and why? The defense had no answers. The jury deliberated for 6 hours and returned the guilty verdict. But what if Corrigan had been right? What if he had been framed? And what if Maxwell Thorne had known or suspected that the wrong man had been convicted? Columbo sat down at Thorne's desk. Looked at the unfinished letter to Caroline. The testimony I gave at Corrigan's trial was true, but it wasn't complete. True but not complete. What did that mean? Columbo thought about testimony, about what you say and what you don't say, about how both can be true. What had Thorne seen that night 20 years ago? He'd testified that he saw Corrigan leaving the vicinity of the gallery. That was true. But what hadn't he mentioned? Columbo's phone rang. Dr. Chen, Lieutenant, preliminary tox results are back. Nothing unusual. No poisons, no drugs beyond a small amount of caffeine. He wasn't drugged. Then how did he die? I'm listing it as undetermined pending further tests. But Lieutenant, I've been thinking. There's one possibility we haven't considered. What's that? What if he wasn't murdered? What if he died of natural causes, but someone staged the scene afterward? Columbo sat up straighter. Why would someone do that? I don't know. Maybe to make it look suspicious? Maybe to cover something up? Maybe to buy time? But if he died naturally, what's there to cover up? That's your job to figure out, Detective. After she hung up, Columbo sat in the quiet house and thought about that possibility. Natural death, staged scene. But that didn't explain the unlocked door, the meeting with Corrigan, the unfinished letter, the sense everyone had that Thorne was troubled about something. No. Someone had killed him. Columbo was sure of that. But how? And who? And why? By 9 p.m., Columbo was exhausted. He'd been up since before dawn, had interviewed a dozen people, had walked through the crime scene multiple times. He sat in his car outside the Thorne estate, the house dark behind its jasmine-covered wall, and called his wife. "Hi, honey." "Yeah, I'm okay. Long day. No, I haven't eaten. I will. Soon." She told him about her day, her voice soothing and familiar. He closed his eyes and listened, letting the normalcy of it wash over him. "I gotta go," he said finally. "But I'll try not to be too late. Love you." He drove through Pasadena, through streets quiet and damp from the day's rain, past Craftsman houses and Spanish revivals, past empty parks and closed shops. The city settling into evening, into its nighttime rhythms. He thought about Maxwell Thorne working in his study in the hours before dawn, about James Corrigan somewhere in Los Angeles, location unknown, about Diana Voss grieving and defensive, about Caroline Thorne flying cross-country to face old pain, about secrets kept for 20 years, now demanding to be told. Something changed before dawn. What had changed? What truth had Thorne faced in those dark hours? What had he realized, or decided, or understood? Tomorrow, Columbo would dig deeper, would push harder, would find the answers. But tonight, he needed food and rest, needed to recharge. Because he had a feeling that tomorrow, day 2, would bring revelations, would bring him closer to the truth, and to a killer who thought they'd gotten away with it. Columbo woke at 6:30 on day 2, made himself toast and coffee, and was at his desk by 7:30. The morning was clear, the rain had moved on, leaving the city washed and bright. He had a list of things to check, details to verify, questions to answer. He worked systematically, making calls, reviewing files, following threads. First, the timeline. He mapped it out on a legal pad. 20 years ago, Richard Westbrook murdered, James Corrigan convicted, Maxwell Thorne testifies. 4 years ago, Maxwell and Caroline Thorne divorce. 3 weeks ago, Corrigan released from prison. 2 weeks ago, Corrigan comes to LA, meets with Thorne. 1 week ago, Thorne seems preoccupied, distracted. 4 days ago, Thursday, last time Diana Voss sees Thorne alive. 2 days ago, Saturday, Thorne dead before dawn. What happened in those 2 weeks between Corrigan's visit and Thorne's death? What had they talked about? What had been set in motion? Second, the key question. How had Thorne died? Dr. Chen had found no cause. No poison, no violence, no obvious medical event. But he was dead, and the scene was staged. Someone had killed him. But how? Columbo called Dr. Chen. "Doc, you said maybe positional asphyxiation. How would that work if there's no sign of restraint? If someone were unconscious, you could position them so they couldn't breathe properly. Hold them in that position until they died. It would leave minimal evidence, especially if done carefully. But he wasn't drugged. So how do you make someone unconscious? Strangulation until they pass out, then release? But that would leave marks. I didn't find marks. What about smothering? Pillow, plastic bag? Again, would leave some evidence. Petechial hemorrhaging in the eyes, damage to the tissues of the nose and mouth. I didn't see that either. So we're stumped. For now, I'm running more tests. Third, James Corrigan. Where was he now? Santiago had put out an APB, but so far nothing. No credit card use, no motel registrations, no sightings. It was like he'd vanished. Or like someone had made him vanish. That thought bothered Columbo. If Corrigan had killed Thorne, he'd flee, sure, but he'd leave some trace. You can't hide completely in the modern world. Not for long. Unless you were dead. Columbo sat back. What if Corrigan was dead too? What if whoever killed Thorne had also killed Corrigan? But that didn't make sense. Why would anyone kill both of them? Unless they both knew something. Unless they both posed a threat. Fourth, the unfinished letter. Columbo read it again. The testimony I gave was true, but not complete. What did Thorne see 20 years ago that he didn't testify to? What additional information did he have? Columbo pulled the trial transcripts. Santiago had requested them yesterday, and they'd arrived this morning, sent electronically from New York. He read Thorne's testimony carefully. Thorne had testified that he was walking home from the theater district around 10:30 p.m., passed by Westbrook Gallery, saw James Corrigan walking quickly away from the direction of the gallery. Corrigan looked agitated, nervous. Thorne thought nothing of it at the time. Corrigan had worked there. It wasn't unusual to see him in the area, but later, when he heard about the murder, he came forward. Under cross-examination, Corrigan's defense attorney asked, "Did you see Mr. Corrigan enter the gallery?" "No." "Did you see him exit the gallery?" "No." "Did you see him exit the gallery?" "No." "So you don't actually know if he'd been inside?" "No, but he was coming from that direction, and he looked nervous." "Lots of people look nervous in New York at night, Mr. Thorne. That's not evidence of murder." "No, but combined with the other evidence." "Just answer the questions, Mr. Thorne." Columbo read it twice. The testimony was solid. Corrigan had been there. Maybe he'd committed the murder. Maybe he hadn't, but he'd been there. Maybe he hadn't, but he'd been there, and he looked guilty. But what else had Thorne seen? What was the incomplete part? By 10 a.m., Columbo was back at the Theatre Collective, looking for anyone who might know more about Thorne's state of mind. He talked to actors, to designers, to the box office manager. Everyone said the same thing. Thorne had seemed distracted lately. Troubled. Not himself. And everyone mentioned the phone call from 2 weeks ago, the one that had shaken him so badly. Did anyone hear what the call was about? Columbo asked Danny Chen. No. Max took it in his office. But when he came out, Sarah said he looked like he'd seen a ghost. Is Sarah here? She's at rehearsal. Different show. Different theater. I can give you the address. Sarah Kim was rehearsing at a small theater in Culver City. Columbo waited until they took a break, then introduced himself. She was in her late 20s, dressed in rehearsal blacks, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. I heard about Max, she said, her eyes filling. I can't believe it. He was so alive, you know. So passionate about the work. I understand you were there when he got an upsetting phone call 2 weeks ago. Yeah. We were rehearsing a scene, and his phone rang. Usually he'd ignore it during rehearsal. But he looked at it and his face just changed. He said, "Excuse me," and went to his office. We all kind of looked at each other like, what was that about? And when he came back, he was pale, shaking a little. He said we were done for the day, that he needed to deal with something. We packed up and left. I asked if he was okay, and he said, "Old ghosts, Sarah. Old ghosts catching up with me." Old ghosts. Yeah. I figured he meant something from his past. Max didn't talk much about his life before LA. Did you ever meet a man named James Corrigan? Did Max ever mention that name? No. Who is he? Columbo explained briefly about the Westbrook murder, about Corrigan's conviction and release. Sarah listened, her eyes widening. You think Corrigan killed Max? As revenge? I'm trying to figure out what happened. Do you know if Max was afraid of anyone? If he'd mentioned feeling threatened? No. If anything, he seemed sad. Like he was grieving something. Or regretting something. After leaving the theater, Columbo called Santiago. Any word on Corrigan? Nothing, sir. It's like he disappeared off the face of the earth. What about the halfway house in New York? Any of his associates there know where he might go? I talked to his parole officer. She said Corrigan kept to himself, didn't make friends. The day he disappeared, he told another resident he had something to settle in California, and then he was going to start fresh somewhere. That's the last anyone heard from him. Something to settle in California, like a conversation with the man whose testimony sent you to prison. But if Corrigan had killed Thorne, where was he now? Columbo drove to the halfway house where Corrigan had stayed during his time in LA. It was a grim place in Hollywood, the kind where the manager asked no questions, as long as you paid in cash. Yeah, remember him, the manager said, showing Columbo the registration card. Quiet guy, kept to himself, checked out after 4 days, said he'd found other arrangements. Did he say where? Nope. Did anyone visit him? Did he get any calls? Not that I know of. Like I said, he kept to himself, dead end. But as Columbo was leaving, the maid was cleaning the hallway. She stopped him. You asking about the man in 2B? The one from 2 weeks ago? Yes, ma'am. He got a visitor. Second day, he was here. A woman. Columbo's attention sharpened. Can you describe her? Tall. Dark hair. 30s maybe. She came in the evening, stayed maybe an hour. Would you recognize her if you saw her again? Maybe. She was pretty, well-dressed, stood out in a place like this. Columbo showed her a photo of Diana Voss that he'd pulled from the Theatre Collective's website. The maid studied it. Yeah, that could be her. I'm not 100% sure, but it looks like her. Diana Voss had visited James Corrigan. She'd lied about not knowing anything about Corrigan's release, about not knowing why Thorne was troubled. She'd lied about a lot of things. Columbo called Diana Voss at 11:30 and asked if he could come by again. She sounded wary, but agreed. When he arrived at her Silver Lake bungalow, she was dressed differently than yesterday, more formally, like she was preparing for something. Or preparing to run. Miss Voss, I need to ask you about James Corrigan again. I told you I don't know anything about him. That's interesting, because a witness places you at a Hollywood motel 2 weeks ago visiting him. Her face went pale. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, I want a lawyer. That's your right. But Miss Voss, if you didn't do anything wrong, talking to me now could help clear this up. Help me understand what happened to Maxwell Thorne. I thought you cared about him. I did. I do. Then help me. Tell me the truth. She sat down heavily on her couch, put her face in her hands. I didn't kill Max. I believe you. But you know something. You've known something this whole time. She looked up at him. If I tell you, it'll destroy his reputation. Everything he built. Everything he meant to people. His reputation is already in question, Miss Voss. A man is dead under suspicious circumstances. The truth is going to come out one way or another. Better it comes out right than wrong. She was quiet for a long time. Then, Max called me 2 weeks ago, the day after he met with Corrigan. He was upset, devastated. He asked me to come over. When I got there, he told me that 20 years ago he'd made a terrible mistake. What mistake? The night Richard Westbrook was murdered. Max did see James Corrigan leaving the area of the gallery. That part was true. But he saw something else too. He saw someone else go into the gallery a few minutes later. Someone who had much more reason to want Westbrook dead. Who? Caroline. Caroline Westbrook. Max's future wife. Columbo absorbed this. He saw Caroline go into the gallery that night. Yes. He didn't know who she was at the time, he'd never met her. But he saw a young woman, blonde, well-dressed, enter the gallery, saw her through the window, and then, maybe 10 minutes later, saw her leave. Quickly, looking shaken. And he didn't testify to this. No, when he heard about the murder the next day, when the police arrested Corrigan, when they had physical evidence and a motive, Max convinced himself that what he'd seen didn't matter, that Corrigan was guilty, that the woman he'd seen must have left before the murder, must have been there for some innocent reason. But he didn't believe that, not really. No, but by the time he met Caroline a year later, by the time they fell in love, by the time they got married, he'd buried it. He'd convinced himself that he was right to stay quiet, that Corrigan was guilty and justice had been served. But James Corrigan maintained his innocence. Yes, and when he got out of prison, when he tracked Max down, when they met at the Grove, Corrigan told Max that he was innocent, that he'd gone to the gallery that night to confront Westbrook about being fired, but Westbrook was already dead when he got there, that he panicked and ran, that someone framed him, and Maxwell Thorne realized he'd helped convict an innocent man. Yes. Diana's voice broke. Max was destroyed by it. He said he had to make it right. He was going to write to Caroline, confess what he'd seen, contact Corrigan's lawyer, try to get the conviction overturned. He knew it would destroy his relationship with Caroline, knew it would ruin his reputation, but he said he had to do it. He said he'd lived with the lie long enough. What did you tell him? I told him to think carefully, to make sure he was right before he destroyed everything, to talk to Caroline first, give her a chance to explain. And did he? I don't know. We were supposed to meet on Friday to talk about it more. But he died before we could. Columbo made notes. Miss Voss, why did you visit James Corrigan at his motel? Max asked me to. He was scared that Corrigan might do something rash, might try to confront Caroline. He asked me to talk to Corrigan, to ask him to wait until Max figured out the right way to handle it. So I went. I talked to him. He was angry, bitter, but he agreed to wait. He said he'd given Max 2 weeks to come forward. If Max didn't, Corrigan would go to the police himself, would tell them everything. And then Maxwell Thorne died, right at the end of those 2 weeks. Yes, which was very convenient for someone who didn't want the truth to come out. Diana met his eyes. I didn't kill him. Maybe not, but you know who did, don't you? She looked away, said nothing. Columbo left Diana Voss's house and sat in his car thinking. Caroline Westbrook had killed her own father 20 years ago. Maxwell Thorne had seen her but never said anything. James Corrigan had been wrongly convicted, and now Thorne was dead, right when he was about to reveal the truth. It made sense. It all made sense. But he couldn't prove it. Caroline had an alibi for the night of her father's murder. She'd been at the charity event with 100 witnesses. The physical evidence in the gallery had pointed to Corrigan, his fingerprints, his DNA, his motive. And for Maxwell Thorne's murder, Caroline had been in New York. There were flight records, there were witnesses. She hadn't been in Los Angeles when Thorne died, unless she'd hired someone, or unless she'd come earlier and hidden the visit, or unless she hadn't killed Thorne herself but had arranged it somehow. Columbo called Santiago. I need you to check flights. Caroline Westbrook Thorne, all flights between New York and Los Angeles for the last month. And car rentals, and hotel stays under her name or any variations. You think she killed him? I think she had motive. I think she had everything to lose if Thorne revealed the truth. I think she's capable of murder. She's done it before. But Lieutenant, there's no evidence. The old case is closed. Corrigan was convicted. Even if Thorne saw her that night, it doesn't prove she killed her father. Maybe she left before the murder. Maybe Corrigan really did it, and she just happened to be there too. Yeah, that's the problem. After hanging up, Columbo drove to Caroline Thorne's hotel. She was staying at the Langham in Pasadena, one of those old luxury places that felt like stepping back in time. She agreed to meet him in the lobby lounge. She looked tired, he thought, worn down by grief and travel and the weight of whatever secrets she carried. Mrs. Thorne, I need to ask you about the night your father died. Her face went very still. That was 20 years ago. That was 20 years ago. I know. But I think it's connected to your ex-husband's death. How? I think Maxwell saw something that night. Something he never testified to. Something that's been bothering him for 2 decades. What did he see? Columbo watched her carefully. He saw you enter the gallery. About 10 minutes after James Corrigan left. She didn't deny it, didn't look surprised, just looked sad. Yes, he did. You were there that night. Yes, he did. You were there that night. Yes. Why didn't you come forward? Why didn't you testify? Because I didn't kill my father, Lieutenant. I found him already dead. I panicked. I ran. I was young and scared and stupid. By the time I realized I should have called the police, it was too late. They'd already arrested Corrigan. And I convinced myself that he must have done it, that I just missed him. But you weren't sure. No, I wasn't sure. Mrs. Thorne, Columbo said, did you know that James Corrigan was released from prison 3 weeks ago? No. Yes. Max told me. In a phone call, 2 weeks ago. What did he tell you? He said Corrigan had contacted him, that they'd met, that Corrigan claimed to be innocent. Max said, he said he believed him. He said he'd seen me that night and never said anything, and he was sorry, and he needed to make it right. How did you react? I was angry, terrified. My whole life I've lived with the guilt of running away that night, with the question of whether I should have stayed, should have called the police, whether my silence helped convict an innocent man. And now Max was telling me that yes, he had all the same doubts, all the same guilt, and he was going to expose everything. What did you say to him? I begged him not to. I told him that he'd ruined both of us for no reason, that we didn't know Corrigan was innocent, that there was other evidence, that... She stopped, took a shaky breath. I said terrible things, things I regret now. Did you threaten him? Not to kill him. I told him that if he went public with this, I'd never forgive him, that he'd destroy what was left of my father's legacy, of my family's name, that he'd make my father's death meaningless. Tears streamed down her face, and then he died. And now I have to live with the fact that the last conversation I had with my ex-husband was me yelling at him for trying to do the right thing. Where were you the night he died? Saturday night into Sunday morning. In New York. In my apartment. Alone. Can anyone verify that? No. Columbo made notes. Mrs. Thorne, did you kill your ex-husband? No. Did you hire someone to kill him? No. Do you know who did? She hesitated. I think maybe he killed himself. Columbo looked up. Why would you think that? Because Max was drowning in guilt. Because he told me on that phone call that he didn't know how to live with what he'd done. Because he said, Caroline, I look at myself in the mirror and I don't recognize who I've become. Because he sounded hopeless. But there's no evidence of suicide. No note. No means. No. Maybe it was passive. Maybe he just let himself die. Maybe he took pills or... She shook her head. I don't know. I just know he was suffering. And now he's gone. Columbo stood. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Thorne. I may need to speak with you again. Lieutenant, do you think Corrigan killed him as revenge for the testimony? I don't know yet. Do you know where Corrigan is now? No. I've never met him. Never spoken to him. I wouldn't know how to find him. As Columbo walked through the elegant hotel lobby, past the oil paintings and the crystal chandeliers and the well-dressed guests, he thought about guilt. About how it accumulates over years, about how lies build on lies until you're trapped inside them. Caroline Westbrook had entered her father's gallery 20 years ago, had found him dead or dying, had run away instead of calling for help. Maxwell Thorne had seen her and said nothing, helping to convict James Corrigan instead. Both of them had lived with that guilt for 20 years, and now Thorne was dead. But who had killed him? And how? Day 2 ends. Transition to evening. By 6 p.m., Columbo was back at his office. surrounded by files and photos and timelines that didn't quite add up. He called Dr. Chen. "Doc, I need you to think about something. If you wanted to kill someone and make it look like natural causes, and you couldn't use poison because it would show up in a tox screen, how would you do it?" "That's a cheerful question. Humor me." She thought about it. "Carbon monoxide, but we'd detect that. Insulin overdose in a non-diabetic. Shows up in blood chemistry. Smothering. Leaves physical evidence. Strangulation. Same thing. Snow. What about something with the heart? Could you cause a heart attack that wouldn't show up? There are ways to induce cardiac arrest, but they'd leave chemical traces or damage. I tested for all of them, so we're back to unexplained death. Unless. Bean 119. In less what? Unless it wasn't just about the method. Maybe it was about the timing. What do you mean? Maxwell Thorne had high blood pressure. He was on medication for it, but according to his medical records, he wasn't great about taking it consistently. He was under stress. He worked long hours. He drank coffee constantly. So he was at risk for a cardiac event. Not imminent, but possible. What if someone didn't kill him directly? What if they created conditions that would trigger a natural event? Like what conditions? Extreme stress, fear, a shock of some kind. If you scared him badly enough, if you created enough adrenaline and cortisol and blood pressure spike, you could trigger a heart attack or stroke in someone already at risk. Columbo sat forward. You could scare someone to death. In a vulnerable person. Yes, technically you wouldn't be killing them. You'd be triggering their own body's fatal response. And that wouldn't show up in an autopsy. Not definitively. It would look like natural causes. After hanging up, Columbo stared at his notes. Someone had scared Maxwell Thorne to death. Someone had come to his house in the hours before dawn, had said something or shown something that had shocked him so profoundly that his overtaxed heart had simply stopped. And then, that someone had posed him at his desk, had arranged the scene to look like he died peacefully while working. But who? And what had they said that was frightening enough to kill a man? Columbo didn't sleep much on day 2 night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind circling the case. By 3 a.m., he'd made a decision. At 6:30 a.m., on day 3, he called Diana Voss. "Miss Voss, I need you to meet me at Maxwell Thorne's house. There's something I want to show you. Something I want to explain." She arrived at 7:30, looking nervous. Columbo met her at the door. "Thank you for coming. I know this is difficult. What's this about, Lieutenant?" "I want to walk through what happened the night Maxwell died. I think I've figured it out, but I need to test my theory." They went to the study. The morning light was soft, filtered through the windows. The room looked peaceful, civilized. "Maxwell Thorne died in this chair," Columbo said. "Sometime between 3 and 4:30 a.m. The coroner can't find a cause of death. No poison, no violence, no obvious medical event. But he's dead. So how? I don't know. I think he was scared to death. Literally, I think someone came here in the middle of the night and told him something, or showed him something, that caused such extreme stress that his heart stopped." Diana was pale. "Who? That's what I'm trying to figure out. It's someone who had a key to the house, someone who knew about his past, about the Westbrook case, about his guilt, someone who had something to lose if he revealed the truth. Caroline, maybe. She had motive, but she was in New York, and so far I can't put her in Los Angeles that night." "Then who?" Columbo turned to look at her. "You." "What?" "No. I told you I didn't. You had a key. You knew about the Westbrook case. Maxwell told you. You knew about his guilt. You knew he was planning to come forward." He paused. "And you had something to lose. I didn't have anything to lose." "Didn't you?" Columbo pulled out his notebook. "I did some research yesterday into your background, your credentials, your career. So it's interesting. You claim to have graduated from CalArts' directing program 10 years ago. Maxwell Thorne as your mentor. And he did vouch for you. Got you your first jobs. Opened doors. Yes, I told you that. But CalArts has no record of you graduating from their program. Her face went white. They have record of you attending for 1 year and then dropping out. Academic probation. Failing grades. That was a bureaucratic mistake. Max helped me sort it out. No, I talked to the registrar. There was no mistake. You never graduated. You never earned your degree. You've been claiming credentials you don't have for 10 years. I don't need a piece of paper to prove I'm talented. Max knew I was good at what I do. The degree didn't matter. But it would matter to everyone else, wouldn't it? To the theaters that hired you based on those credentials. To the grants and fellowships you received. To your reputation. To your whole career. She said nothing. Maxwell Thorne knew the truth. He'd helped you cover it up. Why? Because he believed in me. Or because you had something on him. Some leverage. Did you know about the Westbrook case from the beginning? Did you research his past and find out about the trial? No, I didn't know about any of that until 2 weeks ago when you told me. I don't believe you. Columbo's voice was gentle but firm. I think you knew. I think you've known for a long time. I think you used it to keep him quiet about your fake credentials. A mutual silence pact. You don't tell anyone about his incomplete testimony. He doesn't tell anyone about your fake degree. That's not true. And then James Corrigan got out of prison. And Maxwell's guilt became too much. And he decided to come forward, no matter the cost. Which meant your secret would come out too. Your whole career would collapse. Diana's eyes filled with tears. You don't understand. I'm good at what I do. I'm a real director, degree or not. I've proven myself. I can't let one mistake from 10 years ago destroy everything I've built. So you came here that night. You let yourself in with your key. You came to this study where Maxwell was working. And you told him. What? What did you say to him, Miss Voss? I didn't kill him. What did you tell him? I didn't. She stopped. Took a shaky breath. I told him that if he went public, if he exposed Caroline and himself and the whole mess, I'd be destroyed too. Because people would find out about my degree, about how Max helped me lie. They'd think I was just his pet protege, that I hadn't earned anything on my own. I begged him not to do it. I reminded him of everything we'd worked for, everything we'd built together. And what did he say? He said he had to do the right thing, that he couldn't live with the guilt anymore, that he was sorry but he had to tell the truth. Her voice broke. He said he'd try to protect me, would say he didn't know about my credentials, but he couldn't promise anything. He said I'd have to face the consequences of my own choices. And you were angry. I was terrified. My whole life was about to end. So what did you do? Nothing. I left. I drove home. I didn't kill him. Columbo studied her. Miss Voss, I want to believe you. I really do. But I need you to tell me the complete truth. Were you here when he died? She was quiet for a long time. Then, yes, I didn't leave, Diana said, her voice barely above a whisper. I pretended to. I went out the front door, let Maxwell think I was going home. But I waited in my car down the street. I was too upset to drive, too scared. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes crying, trying to figure out what to do. Columbo waited. And then I saw someone else arrive. Pull up to the house, let themselves in. Who? Who? I couldn't see clearly. It was dark, but they parked on the street, walked up to the house, used a key to get in. Man or woman? I thought it was a man, but I'm not sure. They wore a dark coat, a hood. I only saw them for a second. What time was this? Around 3:30, maybe 3:45. And what did you do? I waited. I didn't know what to do. I thought maybe it was someone Max had called. Maybe his brother or a friend or... I don't know. But then about 20 minutes later, The person came out again, still hooded, got in their car and drove away. Did you see what kind of car? Dark sedan. I'm not good with cars. Maybe a Honda or Toyota? Something common. Did you go back into the house? Yes. She was crying now. I waited a few more minutes, then I went back. I used my key. The door was unlocked. The deadbolt wasn't thrown. I went to the study and... She covered her face. He was there, at his desk, and I could tell right away that something was wrong. The way he was sitting. Too still. Too perfect. What did you do? I went to him. I touched his neck, checking for a pulse. There was nothing. He was dead. And I panicked. I thought maybe he'd had a heart attack while arguing with whoever that other person was. Or maybe that person had done something to him. But there were no marks. No blood. No sign of violence. He just looked like he'd fallen asleep. Why didn't you call 911? Because I was scared. Because I'd been there earlier, fighting with him. Because I'd threatened him. Because I knew how it would look. I thought they'd blame me. So I ran. I went home. And when Rosa called the next morning to tell me he was dead, I acted surprised. You staged the scene. You arranged the papers on his desk. Positioned his hand. Made it look peaceful. No. It was already like that when I got there. Someone else had already done it. The person in the hood. I swear, Lieutenant, I didn't stage anything. I didn't kill him. I didn't report it. Columbo made notes. Miss Voss, withholding evidence, tampering with a crime scene. These are serious charges. I know, but I didn't kill him. Do you know who did? No. I've been trying to figure it out. Who else had a key? Who else knew about the Westbrook case? Columbo thought about that. Who else had a key? Rosa, the housekeeper. But she'd been home, with her family, with an alibi. Caroline. But she'd been in New York. Unless, Miss Voss, you said the person you saw was in a dark coat with a hood. Could it have been a woman? Could it have been someone in disguise? I guess so. I really couldn't tell, but they used a key, so it was someone Maxwell Thorne trusted enough to give a key to. Or someone who stole a key. Or made a copy. Columbo stood. I need you to come down to the station. Make an official statement. Everything you've told me, on the record. Am I under arrest? Not yet. But you're not free to leave town either. After Diana left, driven by Officer Santiago, Columbo stood alone in the study. The morning sun had risen higher now, filling the room with light. Someone had come here at 3:30 a.m. Someone with a key, someone who had confronted Maxwell Thorne, had said something or done something that stopped his heart, and then had carefully, methodically, staged the scene to look like natural death. Who had the most to lose if Thorne revealed the truth? Caroline. Her father's murder, her presence of the scene, her silence all these years. Diana. Her fake credentials, her built-on lies career. But there was someone else. Someone he hadn't considered carefully enough. James Corrigan. What if Corrigan hadn't been the victim in all this? What if he'd been the killer? Columbo pulled out his phone and called Santiago. I need you to check something. James Corrigan. Find out everything about his life in prison, who he associated with, what skills he might have learned. And find out if he had any partners, anyone who might help him. You think Corrigan killed Thorne? I think it's time we found James Corrigan and asked him. The call came at noon. Lieutenant, we found him. Santiago's voice was grim. Found who? James Corrigan. Or rather, we found his body. Columbo felt his stomach sink. Where? Griffith Park. Hidden in brush off one of the trails. Hikers found him this morning. Been dead for at least a week. Maybe longer. Waiting on the coroner. A week. That meant Corrigan had been dead before Maxwell Thorne died. Which meant Corrigan hadn't killed Thorne. Which meant Columbo had been looking in the wrong direction. He drove to Griffith Park, to the roped-off section, where officers and crime scene techs were working. The body had been moved, but they showed him photos. James Corrigan, 50 years old, thin and hard-looking, just like the gardener had described. Single gunshot to the back of the head. Execution style. Robbery, Columbo asked. Wallet's gone, but his watch is still there. If it was robbery, they didn't finish the job. Professional hit, could be, or could be someone who wanted it to look like one. Columbo stared at the photos. James Corrigan had gotten out of prison after 20 years, had come to Los Angeles, had met with Maxwell Thorne, had agreed to wait 2 weeks for Thorne to come forward with the truth. And then someone had murdered him, had silenced him before he could tell his story. Check his pockets, his belongings, see if there's anything that tells us where he was staying after he left the motel. They found a receipt in his jacket, a storage facility in Burbank. Unit rented under the name John Carter, probably an alias. Columbo and Santiago drove to the facility. The manager let them into the unit. Inside, a sleeping bag, some clothes, basic supplies, and a box of files. Legal documents from Corrigan's case. Letters he'd written from prison protesting his innocence. And something else. A journal. Corrigan's prison journal. Continued after his release. Columbo sat on the concrete floor of the storage unit and read. Corrigan had spent 20 years maintaining his innocence. Had spent 20 years trying to figure out who really killed Richard Westbrook. Had developed a theory. Richard Westbrook had been an art dealer, successful and wealthy. But according to Corrigan's research, Westbrook had also been involved in some questionable deals, provenance issues, possibly stolen art, possibly fraud. Corrigan believed that Westbrook had been killed not in a rage by a disgruntled employee, but deliberately by someone he'd cheated, someone who'd waited for the right moment, someone who'd then framed Corrigan for the murder, and Corrigan thought he knew who. The name in the journal was Richard Westbrook's business partner. The person who'd inherited control of the gallery after Westbrook's death, the person who'd been at the charity event with Caroline that night, providing her alibi. The person who'd slowly built a fortune from the gallery over the following 2 decades. Eleanor Westbrook Hayes, Richard Westbrook's sister. Columbo called Caroline Thorne. Mrs. Westbrook's sister. Columbo called Caroline Thorne. Thorne, tell me about your Aunt Eleanor. Eleanor? What does she have to do with anything? That's what I'm trying to find out. Where is she now? In Los Angeles. She flew out when she heard about Max. She's been helping me with arrangements. Where's she staying? At my father's old house in Beverly Hills. I kept it after he died. Eleanor uses it when she's in town. I need to talk to her. Why? Lieutenant, what's going on? I'll explain later. What's the address? Caroline gave it to him. Columbo and Santiago drove to Beverly Hills, to an estate not unlike the Thorne household money, old architecture, high walls. Eleanor Westbrook Hayes answered the door herself. She was in her late 60s, elegant and composed. Grey hair in a chignon, designer clothes, cultured voice. Lieutenant Columbo, Caroline mentioned you might want to speak with me. Come in. They sat in a living room full of art, beautiful pieces, museum quality. Mrs. Hayes, I'm investigating the death of Maxwell Thorne. Yes. Tragic. He was a good man, despite his flaws. What flaws would those be? His guilt. His inability to let the past stay in the past. Caroline told me he was planning to dredge up that awful business with my brother's death. To suggest that somehow James Corrigan was innocent. Ridiculous. Is it? James Corrigan was a violent man with a grudge. He killed my brother. The evidence was overwhelming. Except for one piece of evidence that was never presented. Maxwell Thorne saw Caroline at the gallery that night, going in after Corrigan left. Eleanor's face didn't change. Yes, I knew about that. Caroline told me at the time. She'd gone to see her father, found him dead, panicked. A natural reaction for a young woman. Why didn't she come forward? Because I advised her not to. Because there was no point. Corrigan was already arrested. Caroline's testimony wouldn't have changed anything except to subject her to unwanted scrutiny, or to raise questions about who else might have been there that night. I don't know what you're implying, Lieutenant. I'm implying that you were there too, that you killed your brother, that you framed James Corrigan, that you've been living off the gallery you stole from your brother for 20 years. Eleanor smiled. It was a cold smile. That's an interesting theory. Do you have any proof? James Corrigan thought you did it. He documented his theory. And now he's dead. I heard about that. Tragic, though I can't say I'm sorry. The man murdered my brother. Did you know Maxwell Thorne had met with Corrigan? That Corrigan told him his theory about you. I had no idea. Did you know that Thorne was planning to come forward with what he'd seen that night, to try to get Corrigan's conviction overturned? Caroline mentioned something about it. She was quite upset enough to want him dead. Caroline was in New York when Maxwell died, but you were here, in Los Angeles. Eleanor's Angeles. Eleanor's smile widened. Was I? Mrs. Hayes, Columbo said, pulling out his notebook. Where were you on Saturday night? Into Sunday morning? At home. Here. Asleep. Can anyone verify that? No. I was alone. My husband passed away 3 years ago. I don't have live-in staff. What kind of car do you drive? A Mercedes. Silver. Do you have any other vehicles? Maybe something you rent sometimes. Something dark-colored? A Honda or Toyota? Her expression flickered. Just for a second. No. But Columbo had seen it. The tell. Here's what I think happened, he said, settling back in his chair. James Corrigan got out of prison 3 weeks ago. He'd spent 20 years figuring out who really killed Richard Westbrook. He came to Los Angeles. He met with Maxwell Thorne. He told Thorne his theory that you killed your brother and framed Corrigan. That's absurd. Thorne believed him. Or at least, Thorne started to doubt. Started to remember details from that night. Started to realize that his incomplete testimony might have helped convict an innocent man. So Thorne agreed to help. Agreed to come forward. Gave Corrigan 2 weeks to decide how to proceed, even if this fantasy were true. How would I know about it? Because you were keeping tabs on Corrigan. You've been keeping tabs on him for 20 years. Making sure he stayed quiet. Making sure no one believed his claims of innocence. When he got out, you tracked him here. You found out he'd met with Thorne. You can't prove any of this. You killed Corrigan first, lured him somewhere, shot him, hid his body in Griffith Park. That was, 9 or 10 days ago, before he could go public with his theory. Fantasy. But that wasn't enough. Because Maxwell Thorne also knew Thorne was planning to write to Caroline, to confess what he'd seen. Planning to contact Corrigan's lawyer. So you had to silence him too. Maxwell died of natural causes. No. He died because you scared him to death. Columbo leaned forward. You went to his house that night. You have a key. You'd copied Caroline's years ago, just in case. You let yourself in. It was around 3:30 in the morning. Maxwell was working in his study, and you told him something. Something so shocking, so terrifying, that his heart stopped. What could I possibly tell him that would do that? I think you told him the truth about that night 20 years ago. I think you told him exactly how you killed your brother. How you set up James Corrigan. How you just killed Corrigan too. And I think you told him that if he said anything, Caroline would be next. Eleanor's smile was gone now. Her face was hard. You can't prove any of this. You're right. I can't. Not yet. But I will. Because you made mistakes. You rented a car for the night you killed Corrigan. Something untraceable to you. But rental companies keep records. And you went to Thorne's house. Diana Voss saw you. She can't identify you definitively, but she saw someone. She saw someone in a hood. Could have been anyone. And you staged the scene. You posed Maxwell at his desk, arranged the papers, made it look peaceful. But you did it too carefully. Too perfectly. Real death is messy. This looked arranged. I wasn't there. Columbo stood, walked to the mantelpiece, looked at the art on the walls. These pieces. From your brother's gallery? From his collection? Some of them, yes, must be worth millions. They are. That's what it was about, wasn't it? The money. The art. Your brother built something valuable, and you wanted it. Maybe he was going to sell. Maybe he was going to cut you out, so you killed him and framed a convenient employee. You have a vivid imagination, Lieutenant, and you've been living off that crime for 20 years, built a fortune, built a reputation. But it was all based on murder, and when the truth threatened to come out, you killed again. First Corrigan, then Thorne. Prove it. Columbo turned to face her. Do you know what gave you away? I didn't. The clocks. She blinked. What? What? In Maxwell Thorne's study, he collected antique clocks, repaired them. The room was full of stopped clocks, all at different times. So when you staged the scene, you were so focused on positioning him perfectly, on arranging the papers, on making it look natural, that you didn't notice something. One of those clocks, the French or Malou timepiece on the mantelet, started working that night. That's impossible. No, it's not. Those old clocks, sometimes they just need to be moved the right way. A bump, a vibration. The pendulum starts swinging. Mr. Thorne hadn't gotten around to fixing that one yet, but that night, something set it in motion. I don't understand. When we found Maxwell Thorne, that clock read 4:17 Missa. All the others were stopped at various earlier times, when Thorne had stopped working on them. But that one was running. Had been running for maybe 15 minutes. So something happened around 4 a.m. Something that jarred that clock enough to start it. And here's the interesting part. When I examined it, I found your fingerprints on the base. Eleanor went very still. You bumped into the mantel. You were probably checking Thorne's pulse, making sure he was really dead. You weren't careful. You knocked the clock slightly. It started running. And you didn't notice. Columbo moved closer. But more importantly, the clock tells us something else. It tells us the exact moment something changed in that room. 4 a.m. Right around the time Maxwell Thorne died. Something changed before dawn, Mrs. Hayes. The truth started coming to light. Eleanor stared at him. Then slowly, she smiled again. You know, she said softly, I underestimated you. Caroline said you were rumpled and silly. But you're not, are you? You're dangerous. I'm just thorough, ma'am. Richard underestimated people too. Underestimated me. Richard underestimated people too. Underestimated me. Thought I was just his little sister, grateful for a job at his gallery. Didn't realize I knew more about art than he did. But I'd made all his best deals. That I deserved half of everything. So you killed him. He was going to squeeze me out. Going to give Caroline control when she turned 25. Everything I'd built Hove, I'd worked for. I couldn't let that happen. So you murdered your own brother. I solved a problem. Her voice was cold. And it worked perfectly for 20 years. James Corrigan went to prison. Caroline inherited but didn't want the business. I ran the gallery, made it successful, became wealthy and respected. Everyone won. Except James Corrigan, and your brother, and Maxwell Thorne. Collateral damage, necessary sacrifices. And when Corrigan got out, when he threatened to reveal the truth, I did what needed to be done. Killed him, quietly, efficiently. He'd wasted 20 years in prison on a crusade for justice. I gave him peace. And Maxwell Thorne? Eleanor's eyes were cold. I went to his house that night, used the key I'd copied years ago from Caroline's keyring she never knew. I found him at his desk, working. I told him I knew about his meeting with Corrigan. Told him I just killed Corrigan. told him that if he said one word, I'd make sure Caroline was blamed for both murders, plenty of evidence I could plant to frame her. You threatened his ex-wife. I told him the truth, that I'd protected Caroline all these years by letting Corrigan take the fall, that I could just as easily destroy her. I told him exactly how I'd do it, where I'd plant evidence, how I'd make it look. I was very detailed, very specific, and it stopped his heart. He went pale, started clutching his chest, started gasping. I just watched. It took maybe 3 minutes. Then he slumped forward and it was over. Heart attack, stress-induced, technically natural causes. You killed him. I simply told him the truth. His own guilt and fear did the rest. And then you staged the scene. I made it look peaceful, respectful. Arranged him nicely. I'd loved Max once, you know, when he and Caroline were happy. I didn't want him to look undignified in death. Columbo shook his head. You really think you can admit all this and walk away? Eleanor smiled. You can't record this conversation without my consent, Lieutenant. California law, two-party consent required. So this is just talk. Your word against mine. No proof. Santiago stepped out from the hallway where he'd been standing. Actually, ma'am, Lieutenant Columbo is wearing a wire, and I witnessed you confessing to 3 murders. Eleanor's face went white. Columbo pulled out a small recording device from his jacket pocket. And I asked for your consent, right before we started. You said, and I quote, record whatever you want. You remember that? She stared at him, realization dawning. You tricked me. No, ma'am. I just let you talk, just like I've been doing with everyone involved in this case. Listening, paying attention, giving people enough room to reveal themselves. He pulled out his handcuffs. Eleanor Westbrook Hayes, you're under arrest for the murders of Richard Westbrook, James Corrigan, and Maxwell Thorne. By 6 p.m., Eleanor Westbrook Hayes was in custody. The formal charges would come later, but she wasn't going anywhere. Columbo called Caroline Thorne to tell her. The conversation was brief and painful. My aunt. Caroline's voice was hollow. My aunt killed my father. I'm sorry, Mrs. Thorne. I know this is difficult. All these years I thought. I blamed myself for running away. I thought maybe I could have saved him if I'd stayed. But he was already dead when I got there, wasn't he? Yes, Mum. Your aunt killed him before you arrived. You couldn't have saved him. And Max. She killed Max too. Yes. A long silence. Then, at least he was trying to do the right thing. At the end, he was trying to tell the truth. Yes, ma'am. He was. Lieutenant? James Corrigan. He really was innocent. Yes. We destroyed his life. Max and I, we stayed silent, and an innocent man spent 20 years in prison. You were both victims too, Mrs. Thorne, of your aunt's manipulation, of your own fear and guilt. People make mistakes. What matters is what they do when they realize it. Max tried to make it right. Yes, he did. After hanging up, Columbo drove to the Theatre Collective. Diana Voss was there, cleaning out Maxwell Thorne's office. She looked up when he entered, her face uncertain. Miss Voss, we arrested Eleanor Westbrook Hayes for the murders of Maxwell Thorne and James Corrigan. Eleanor? Caroline's aunt? Yes. She's confessed. Diana sat down heavily. So I'm not a suspect anymore. No. Though you'll still face charges for tampering with the scene. But that's for the DA to decide. I understand. Columbo looked around the office. Photos on the walls. Awards. Programs from various productions. A life's work. Miss Voss, about your credentials. She looked up, fear in her eyes. That's between you and your conscience. And maybe the institutions you work with. It's not my jurisdiction. I'm going to come clean, tell the truth, face whatever consequences come. That's good. That's what Mr. Thorne would have wanted. He taught me so much. about directing, about art, about integrity. I dishonored that. I dishonored him. You can honor him now. By being honest. By earning your reputation rather than faking it. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I will. I promise. By 8 p.m., Columbo was finally heading home, exhausted, drained, but satisfied. 3 murders solved. 1 killer in custody. Some small measure of justice for James Corrigan, who'd been robbed of 20 years of his life. But also 3 people dead who shouldn't be, and a family destroyed by secrets and lies and delayed truth. He thought about Maxwell Thorne, working in his study in the hours before dawn, trying to figure out how to make things right, trying to tell the truth, even though it would cost him everything. He died for that attempt. Died because Eleanor Westbrook Hayes couldn't allow the truth to emerge. But in the end, it had emerged anyway. The light of dawn had revealed it. Something changed before dawn. That's what Thorne had told Diana, that the hour before dawn is when everything seems clearest, when you can see what you've been avoiding. Thorne had seen his guilt, had faced it, had tried to make amends. That took courage. That took integrity. And in the end, that had been enough. His death had not been in vain. The truth he died trying to tell was now known. Justice, delayed and imperfect, but justice nonetheless. When Columbo got home, his wife had dinner waiting. Nothing fancy, just pot roast with vegetables. But it smelled like heaven. Long case? She asked, kissing his cheek. Yeah, but it's over now. The theater director, I saw it on the news. Yeah. Turned out to be about something that happened 20 years ago. Guilt. Secrets. Old crimes catching up with people. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Then his wife said, "You look sad." "I am, a little." The victim, Maxwell Thorne, he was trying to do the right thing, trying to tell the truth after years of staying silent. And it got him killed. But you caught the killer. Yeah, I did. But sometimes that doesn't feel like enough, you know. 3 people dead. A man who spent 20 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. A whole family torn apart by lies. His wife reached across the table and took his hand. "You can't fix everything, honey. You can't only do your job. Find the truth. Get justice. You did that. I know. And that man Maxwell Thorne, he'd be grateful. He tried to tell the truth. You finished what he started." Columbo squeezed her hand. "You're right. Thank you. More pot roast?" "Yeah, thanks." Later, lying in bed, listening to the rain that had started up again outside, Columbo thought about time. About how it moves forward, but the past never really goes away. About how guilt accumulates like dust in corners, invisible until light hits it just right. About those stopped clocks in Maxwell Thorne's study, each one frozen at a different moment, and that one clock that started running again, marking the moment everything changed. 4 a.m., the hour before dawn, the darkest moment, right before light. Something changed before dawn. For Maxwell Thorne, it had been the moment of death, but also, perhaps, the moment of peace. Of finally trying to make things right. For James Corrigan, it had been too late. But at least his name would be cleared. At least people would know he'd been innocent. For Eleanor Westbrook Hayes, it was the moment her 20 years of lies came crashing down. And for Columbo, it was another case closed. Another truth revealed. Another small victory for justice in an imperfect world. He closed his eyes and let sleep come. The next morning, Columbo drove past the Thorne estate one more time. The jasmine on the wall was blooming despite the season. The house sat quiet behind its gates, waiting for whoever would inherit it, whoever would live there next and write new stories in those old rooms. The rain had cleared. The November sun was bright and clean. Los Angeles stretched out around him, millions of people starting their days, each one carrying their own secrets, their own guilt, their own attempts at redemption. Columbo's car made that grinding noise when he turned left. He really did need to get it looked at. But not today. Today, he had paperwork to file, reports to write, loose ends to tie up, the bureaucratic aftermath of solving a case, and then, maybe, a few days off. Time with his wife. Time to rest. Time to prepare for the next case, the next murder, the next truth that needed revealing. Because there would always be a next case. There would always be secrets that needed exposing. There would always be someone who thought they could get away with murder. And there would always be Lieutenant Columbo, rumpled and persistent, to prove them wrong. He drove on, into the morning, into the city, into whatever came next, and so another case closed, another truth uncovered. Lieutenant Columbo has returned to his life, his wife, his rumpled car. The city sleeps around him. In this case, something changed before dawn was the key. It was the moment when Maxwell Thorne faced his guilt and Eleanor Westbrook Hayes revealed her true nature. It was the hour when darkness gave way to light, when secrets could no longer hide, when truth demanded to be told. Columbo knows that the hours before dawn are sacred in their way. The time when we're most honest with ourselves, when we can't run from what we've done. Maxwell Thorne understood that. In his final hours, working in that study, he knew that dawn was coming. That light would reveal everything. That something had changed and could never be unchanged. As you drift towards sleep now, let this story settle. Let your mind release it. The case is solved, the killer caught, justice done. Tomorrow brings new mysteries, new questions, new stories. But tonight, there is only rest. Your breathing is slow and steady. Your body is heavy and warm. The room is quiet. The world is distant. Close your eyes. Let go. Let the story fade like a dream. Let sleep carry you away to wherever you need to be. We're grateful you spent this time with us. Likes help others discover these nighttime mysteries. Tell us in the comments, which clue did you notice first? When did you realize Eleanor was the killer? Share your thoughts. Connect with our community of mystery lovers. Good night, dear listeners. Sleep deeply. Dream peacefully. We'll meet again soon for another mystery.